Good morning, everyone. I'm Eugene Kennedy. I'm the interim director for the School of Education at LSU, Lutrill and Payne School of Education. And welcome to our webinar, Homelessness Comes to School, Strategies for Educators. We have a fantastic panel of presenters this morning to talk with you about issues related to children who are experiencing various levels of homelessness and how you as an educator might deal with that. And so with no further delay, I'll go ahead and I'll turn the microphone over to Lois Stuckey, who will introduce our speakers. Lois?
Good morning. I want to introduce Deirdre Nicholson, and she brings more than 20 years of leadership experience in the education, child advocacy, and nonprofit management sectors to her role as executive director for NACI. Most recently, Ms. Nicholson served as organizational ombuds for Atlanta Public Schools, where she led stakeholder advocacy initiative, dispute resolution, and equity-focused policy analysis on behalf of more than 50,000 students. Previously, Ms. Nicholson served as Education Program Manager with the Georgia Department of Education for the Nita M. Lowry 21st Century Community Learning Centers program, the largest federally funded initiative for out-of-school time programming that serves more than 30,000 students annually throughout Georgia. Ms. Nicholson's extensive work in education also included her role as a consultant with the Georgia Department of Education Federal Programs Division, where she advocated on behalf of students and families experiencing homelessness. She also gained a wealth of federal policy and legal advocacy experience through her work as a legal fellow with the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights and with the Office of Secretary of Education, where she worked as part of a policy development team for Race to the Top, a $4.35 billion discretionary grant initiative. A native of Charlotte, North Carolina, Ms. Nicholson earned a Juris Doctor from the Indiana University Bloomington Moore School of Law and holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. A champion for student success, Ms. Nicholson is driven by the desire to remove barriers and enhance advocacy for families who need assistance navigating the complexities for the education landscape. She believes that critical conversations and strategy development centered in equity serve as the foundation for identifying and meeting the unique support needs of students and families. Equity should be at the core of every discussion surrounding student outcomes, educational services, family engagement, and policy. Deirdre, we're ready. We're excited to have you. Thank you.
Well, good morning, and thank you so much, Lois, for introducing me, Ms. Stuckey, and thank you so much, Dr. Kennedy and Dr. Tobin, for the invitation to participate in this wonderful webinar. I was excited to be invited to LSU, and today, hopefully, we'll have an opportunity to talk with our audience a little bit about roaring back strategies for advocacy and supporting resiliency in students experiencing homelessness. And so with that, I will jump in and talk a little bit about NACI and our organization. So NACI, the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth, is the largest professional development association. It is a membership organization of more than 2,500 educational advocates, government and nonprofit leaders, and McKinney-Vento liaison school social workers who are all working to elevate educational equity and excellence for youth experiencing homelessness. And what I'll say about equity is I know that in the landscape of education in the world right now, equity is a very challenged term. But when we think of equity, we are focusing in on equity as being meeting students, meeting people where they are based upon their unique needs. And so we all have unique needs of how we come into the world. Some people need a cup of coffee in the morning before they get their day started. Other people need a Diet Coke. But those unique needs are what help people to function and to be contributing members of society and productive needs of members of society. And so when we think about that, I'd like to frame equity in that way. And so really understanding unique needs of individuals and particularly students experiencing homelessness and other vulnerable youth. So NACCE works on behalf of youth experiencing homelessness, but also what we consider cross systems youth, so other areas of youth vulnerability. We are very, very fortunate at NACCE to be able to lead professional development as well as program consulting for more than 4,000 professionals throughout the United States and all of our U.S. territories. And we are extremely honored to be able to sponsor scholarships for youth from vulnerable backgrounds, specifically homelessness and students who've experienced foster care of up to $5,000. And so through NACCE, I have the ability to talk with you, but have the ability to talk more about something that's very near and dear to my heart, which is advocacy on behalf of youth experiencing homelessness. And so and as we talk about the facts and figures and outcomes for youth experiencing homelessness in the United States, we know that every year more than over 4.2 million youth are experiencing homelessness. That's an extremely large number, and that's a number that in many ways there's some conflicting data around, because when we think of students experiencing homelessness who are identified, we're at about 1.4 million students. And so what this means is that there's a little bit of a disparity between the number of students who are actively identified as experiencing homelessness by our school districts and the larger number of youth who are experiencing homelessness who are not identified and go below the radar. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later in our conversation this morning. But unaccompanied homeless youth make up about 7% of the overall homeless population. And statistically, what we know is that 1 in 10 adults ages 18 to 24 have experienced some type of housing insecurity or homelessness. And so that is a very significant part of our overall story of what homelessness looks like in our country right now. And then when we talk about the disproportionalities, we know that youth from marginalized backgrounds, minority communities, youth who are identified as LGBTQIA+, are largely more represented in the population of youth experiencing homelessness because of the life challenges that they experience or because of a lack of support from adults in their lives. And unfortunately, when we talk about the education of youth experiencing homelessness, we know that the dropout rate hovers at above 80% for youth who are experiencing homelessness. And so NACCE exists specifically for that reason, and that is to ensure that we are able to identify the educational needs and support that youth experiencing homelessness or McKinney-Vento youth are challenged with day to day as they navigate through our educational system. So as we talk about contributing factors for homelessness in the United States, we know that there are 4 baseline factors and other external factors that impact homelessness, but the first being generational poverty. So generation upon generation of families who have had the unfortunate circumstance of poverty impacting their ability to rise out of their situations of economic disparity. Domestic violence, we know that there is a high prevalence of families, individuals who are forced to flee their homes because they have experienced domestic violence and have experienced it in many instances chronically over the years. Insufficient income, unemployment, and underemployment. And we're seeing a rise in this area, unfortunately, right now, that we're seeing more and more families and individuals who are experiencing homelessness because they are underemployed and have insufficient income and a lack of affordable housing, also on the rise in our current economic climate. And so these four factors together, along with others, are key to having an understanding of why homelessness exists in the United States, but why it trickles down in such a detrimental way to our young people in schools. So I couldn't come to LSU without thinking about your mascot, the tiger, and really thinking about what drives your roar. So many instances when we're in professional development settings, people say, well, what's your why? What is your why for the work that you do? Or how did you come into this work? But what I like to think about is what drives your roar. And when I was a very young girl, my grandmother used to say, we are not worriers, we are warriors. And so, in thinking about that and embracing that every day, especially now, as I have an opportunity to lead NACCE, I think about, well, what helps me to be a warrior? And a lot of that is that internal roar. So, as we think today through our dialogue, I'd like for you to keep in mind what is the roar that keeps you in this work, and what part of your roar may need to be challenged? And we'll talk a little bit about that today. So I want to take you back to 24 years ago. Um, my roar really began. I was very aware of students experiencing homelessness because I was a volunteer in what we called back in the 90s a runaway youth shelter. And so I was working as a volunteer, a student volunteer, with youth who were considered runaways. And back then, the stigma for runaway was that there was something that they did wrong and they didn't get along with their parents. And so they left home to run away. What I did not know and what I realize now is that it was actually a shelter for youth experiencing homelessness for a variety of factors. But many years later, after that youth volunteer experience, I started teaching. I was a classroom teacher in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a what would be Charlotte's most urban school. And it started with a backpack and a burger at 7:15 in the morning. So I had a student, his name was Antonio, and Antonio, every morning before school, would come to my classroom along with a few other students to help me prepare for the day. And it never failed that he was always there when I walked into the school building. And so over the course of a couple of weeks, I kept noticing that in the morning, my classroom smelled like Burger King. And I was like, I smell onions, I smell pickles. It's 7 in the morning. Like, why are there burgers in my class? So one day I walked to the back of the room. I didn't say anything, and I found a backpack. And I held the backpack up very much like the picture here. And I said, what in the world is in this backpack, and whose backpack is this? So no one said anything. And about 10 minutes later, Antonio came up to me and he said, Miss Lynch, may I speak with you in the hall? And I said, okay, Antonio. And he said, well, that's my backpack. And there's a burger in there. And unfortunately, my family right now, my dad, we are living apart. My dad is living in our car. My mom, my little brother, and I are living in a shelter. And I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to stay there because I'm about to be 13. But at nighttime, because my parents work, we can't always make it back to the shelter in time to eat dinner. So my dad brings me a burger from his job, and I hold on to it when I'm hungry through the day. And I can say to you today that this was my first realization of what my student was going through. And he said to me in the moment, he said, but please don't tell anyone. And I still can feel the weight of that please don't tell anyone today. Like even preparing for this dialogue, I remember the tears in his eyes and the tremble in his voice. And then I remembered thinking, well, what am I going to do? I don't know what to do for Antonio. I don't know about youth experiencing homelessness. And so it started the roar within my heart to understand more. And now that understanding more, through that understanding more, I've met hundreds, if not thousands, of Antonios. But what I will say is that Antonio had a two-parent home. Antonio had a father who was engaged and was dropping him off. Antonio had everything that looked aligned with what student experience should be. And I say should be. But in reality, there were layers to why Antonio was showing up in my class early in the morning at 7:15, and layers upon what his family was facing in traumatic and tremendous uncertainty. And so that prompted me to learn more. And in that search for learning more, I learned about McKinney-Vento. So the McKinney-Vento Act, which we now through ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act in 2015, was reauthorized as Title IX Part A. And so through the McKinney-Vento Act, which sprung from the earlier McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, we were able to determine how students can be defined and identified as homelessness. And so the McKinney-Vento Act allows us to, as educators and advocates, to define students experiencing homelessness as students who lacked fixed, adequate, and regular nighttime residence. And through the McKinney-Vento Act, the role of McKinney-Vento liaisons developed, many of whom are championing this work daily. But in more than 13,000 school districts around the United States, McKinney-Vento liaisons are empowered and through statute required to assigned to advocate on behalf of students experiencing homelessness, and tasked with facilitating identification, immediate enrollment of these students, as well as school selection and coordinated services such as transportation. And so in this moment of learning more about Antonio and learning more about McKinney-Vento, it helped me to also understand why that disparity exists. The 4.2 million students or young people who experience homelessness versus the 1.4 who are identified, is that through McKinney-Vento, the educational definition of homelessness differs than what our federal definition is for homelessness, as detailed by the Department for Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. And so under McKinney-Vento, categorical eligibility for homelessness includes students who are sharing housing due to economic hardship, so maybe living with a family member or doubled up, living with friends, couch surfing, students who are living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, or in campgrounds, students like Antonio, who was living in an emergency or transitional shelter, students who were sleeping in places that are unfit for human habitation. So traditionally, what many of us think of as unsheltered homeless, living in park benches, living under bridges, and students living in cars, parks, other public spaces, or in substandard housing. And so when we think about the HUD definition of homelessness, which oh goodness, I'm losing my train of thought. I'm so sorry. More simply defines homelessness from a perspective of, do you have shelter or do you not have shelter? Are you in a shelter or are you unsheltered? Versus this categorical eligibility for McKinney-Vento, which allows students to be defined as homeless for the purpose of education based upon these categories. And so let's talk a little bit more about your ROAR. Is your ROAR centered in resilience or resistance? And so what I'll say is, as a young educator, I knew that I had so many things on my plate, so many things going on every day, so many professional developments to attend. I had curriculum to follow. I had budgets to align and ensure that spending was allocated appropriately. And so at the time, I wasn't always thinking about resilience in my students who are having challenges. I was thinking about, is Antonio coming to school? Are the students prepared for class? And then at a higher level of leadership, later in my career, really tasked with more compliance-based focus. And so, as we think through the ROAR that we have for our students who are vulnerable and experiencing homelessness, we have to also think about, are we thinking about their capabilities as being amazing, productive citizens beyond the school year that we are working with them? Or are we thinking that, they didn't come to school, they're going to ISS, or their discipline challenges are too much for their teacher, 10-day suspension? So where do we as professionals and advocates and educators align? Are we in the camp of resilience and believing that our students can be their best possible selves in spite of their lived experience? Or are we focused on resistance and the rules that help us to obviously focus on having appropriate venues for public education, but they don't necessarily align with those equity needs that students and families have, which are the unique needs based upon their lived experiences. And so this Wordle just really focuses in on some of the words when we think about homelessness that align more with resistance. So we think of students potentially as disruptive, angry, behind, different, tired, absent. So as we think through how we categorize beyond just a student being McKinney-Vento because of the categorical eligibility, what are the unstated thoughts, feelings? Do we feel like these students are burdened? Do we feel like the parents who homelessness for some reason is an adult problem and it's the adult's fault? So I challenge you to think about, are you in the camp of resilience or resistance when you're thinking about supporting vulnerable youth? And so in realizing and working with Antonio and other students that were like him, I started thinking that student homelessness doesn't look like someone living unsheltered or under a park bench for everyone. It looked in many instances like school transition, students who had a lack of basic needs or poor nutrition, multiple periods of missed assignments or incomplete records. It was exhibited as an inability to participate in extracurricular activities because they couldn't regularly stay on a schedule that would allow them to participate in a sport with fidelity or the school orchestra, limited and inconsistent access to resources such as technology, internet in these times, or sounds like we move around a lot, I don't have a lot of space, or I'm keeping my clothes in my book bag because I just need to change clothes, when in reality they may not have a home. And so what I will share is that the school where I was teaching, where I encountered Antonio, I ultimately found out that of the 900 students that were in the school, in that middle school, we had more than 90, so 10% were McKinney-Vento. McKinney-Vento classified, which means that there were others who were not identified and who were below the radar, one of whom was Antonio. And so with that, in thinking about in plain sight, other students who are in our communities, in our schools, but often seen as invisible, we can reflect back to the unaccompanied homeless youth. So approximately 700,000 of youth experiencing homelessness are unaccompanied, meaning they are not part of a family that has an adult guardian or parents. They are often more challenging to identify because they're either considered as I mentioned earlier, runaways, or they're living doubled up or in temporary environments with extended family or friends. And unaccompanied homeless youth statistically have higher rates of teen death caused by suicide. And that, of course, suicide is the leading cause of death for unaccompanied homeless youth. And then adjacent to that are our youth experiencing foster care, another highly vulnerable group of students. 570,000 students each year are experiencing foster care. More than 25% of students experiencing foster care experienced homelessness before entering and being adjudicated into the foster care system. And more than 50% of youth in foster care at age 17 will experience homelessness before the age of 21. And so what we're seeing is that many of our foster care students are becoming our adult homeless as they age out of foster care. So in thinking about trauma, vulnerability, and absenteeism, we know that there are varying levels of stress that individuals feel and families feel when they are trying to cope through homelessness. So we have acute trauma, which is related from a single incident of homelessness, or a single incident of trauma that impacts the family's living situation. Chronic trauma, so repeated or prolonged trauma related to events such as domestic violence or other types of abuse, child abuse, elder abuse. Complex trauma, so varied multiple traumatic events happening at one time that could impact the family, that range on a spectrum from family violence all the way to death within a family. And then complex developmental trauma is repetitive trauma for young people. And that is what we're seeing with many of our McKinney-Vento youth, is that they have multi-tiered layers of complex and repetitive trauma. And so these vulnerabilities have a direct relationship on a student's ability to actively and fully participate in school. And so I'll share briefly a little bit about the attendance factor and what we found as a common denominator for ensuring that students are on a path to success. We know that post-COVID, there's been a growing absenteeism gap between students experiencing homelessness and non-homeless children and youth. We are seeing that 51.7, upwards of 53% of students experiencing homelessness have an increased level of absenteeism, whereas their non-homeless counterparts are around 31%. So the trend is growing that our students experiencing homelessness are becoming more detached from the school district, school-based support that we can offer as the education sector. And much of that is also related to disproportionate discipline and the consequences that are enforced because of student absenteeism. And so in thinking through understanding that school is a lifeline for identification of students and their vulnerabilities when they're experiencing homelessness, but also a lifeline for connecting students to academic and well-being support services, it's very important for us to target in on analyzing data for student subgroups. And so recommended that school districts and leaders really focus in on understanding what is going on with attendance and the concerns that impact school participation by your students who are in foster care, students who are experiencing homelessness, and special education students. Focusing in on high-level trauma-informed training for all school staff and in-depth training that allows staff to understand the trauma-informed strategies that can assist students. And then to also disseminate best practices related to chronic absenteeism and highlight national models related to improving school climate and culture. And then school climate and culture are definitely known as equalizers for attendance. So as a recommendation, focusing in on a positive versus a punitive attendance culture so that we have students who are coming to school not afraid of what happened because they may have missed school because they were living in their car and couldn't get across town to their school, but focusing in on the fact that there's a value in every student in the educational environment and creating a culture that wraps its arms around students regardless of the lived experiences that they have, but also focusing in on the why of a student's absence and attendance. Understanding cultural factors, again, the lived experiences that may impact parents and students' perceptions of schools, focusing in on how it is that trust can be developed between various subgroups of students, parents, and guardians. And this is a list of attendance practices and evidence-based research and resources related to attendance, including the National Center for Homeless Education, which is the technical assistance center of the U.S. Department of Education that specifically provides resources for addressing and understanding the needs of students experiencing homelessness. And then really realizing that liaisons and district leaders are the eye of the tiger. You are at the center of developing a sound game plan for students. So whether that's identification of students experiencing homelessness or other vulnerabilities, enrollment, ensuring that they are immediately enrolled without barriers to entry into your school district and schools, focusing in on parent engagement and realizing that whatever is going on with parents, it still is important to engage them in their child's experience so that they are your counterpart in ensuring student access to progress and resources, policy development analysis, and then again, breaking barriers to ensure full participation in school. So not just students who are experiencing homelessness receiving backpacks at the beginning of the year and snack packs at Thanksgiving and Christmas, but also looking at how can students really be part of the day-to-day experience, whether through STEAM activities or opportunities to participate extracurricularly in sports, debate club, or even volunteerism. Transportation, which we know is a hot topic because the costs related to transportation in many instances is perceived as labor intensive and a burden for school districts, but really focusing in on developing a plan for coordination of services. And as I plan to conclude, focusing in on communication, coordination, and collaboration. And again, looking at resilience or resistance. Are you focused on the student's ability who are experiencing homelessness or other vulnerabilities to bounce back? Or are you opposing, or is the culture of your district or school opposing change to either welcome these students into the fold in a positive way? Are you focused on the adaptability, and which is the key to student resilience, and allowing students and families to identify what their unique needs are when they come into your school building? Or are you fostering resilience through understanding, having an organizational-wide, a school-wide approach to understanding who's in your building? And then these are strategies for amplifying advocacy on behalf of students experiencing homelessness. The first would be understanding your funding and resources, beginning and spending with student success in mind, and advocating for blending and braiding of funds, whether that's advocating for the Title I Part A set aside that is dedicated specifically for earmarking funds within Title I for students experiencing homelessness, or applying for a McKinney-Vento subgrant if your school district has a baseline of 150 or more students, or understanding what the needs are for identifying the students within your district so that you can advocate for application for those funds. Focusing in on data analysis, targeted professional development, so that there's ongoing professional development for a diverse range of education leaders within your district, whether that's the transportation director or the director of custodial services, so that everyone understands that McKinney-Vento goes beyond the door of the liaison, but everyone is in the fight together and in the advocacy together. We already talked about trauma-informed practices and fostering collaborative partnerships with families and communities. So in preparing to close, I would ask that you focus through and in how are you building transparency and student-centered approaches to growth. So focusing in on how do you evaluate data for McKinney-Vento youth as a specific subgroup, and how do you create cross-functional professional development so that everyone understands what's at stake for these students, as well as how do you coordinate strategies for awareness in spaces that are cross-sector? So whether those are public health partnerships with your local hospital authority, juvenile justice partnerships with your juvenile court and child advocacy attorneys, and then even city county government through youth job programs or internship opportunities. Private public coalitions, it's not unheard of for school districts to develop relationships with their community foundations, for school districts to develop relationships with local businesses that can also provide supplemental support. And then integrated service delivery. So understanding that the cross systems nature of students experiencing homelessness potentially also being part of your special education population or part of a population of students who may be unaccompanied, and coordinating services that are integrated. And lastly, focusing in on how is your ROAR resilience focused? Are you focusing in on how these students are hardworking, that they are patient, that they are resilient, and that we are targeting outcomes for them in a way that focuses in on resource-based outcomes versus deficit-based outcomes? I would love to invite each and every one of you to consider joining NACCE in our national fight to eradicate youth homelessness. We host a conference of more than 2,500 advocates from those cross sectors of education that I mentioned, as well as government and policy leaders and nonprofit leaders. This year, our theme is United We Soar. We recognize that we can't do this work alone, and that regardless of what's happening in our local, national, or regional landscapes, we can bring best practices and share together, united in the effort to support vulnerable youth. NACCE membership is focused on advocacy and professional development. This year we'll be in Dallas, so please take an opportunity to visit our website to learn more about our free professional development opportunities in the form of webinars, but also to get updates through our monthly newsletter and conference updates for 2025. So thank you again, Dr. Tobin. Thank you again, LSU, for having me. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you more about finding your roar and identifying whether it is resilience-based or resistance-based. Thank you so much. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the webinar.
Thank you so
you,
much. That
Dr.
was wonderful.
Alrighty, so let's move right along, and let me introduce Dr. Carrie Tobin, who is a researcher who focuses on the effects of poverty on all facets in education, with particular attention to students' housing statuses. How homelessness and poverty impact which schools children attend, what their teachers expect of them, and what they will ultimately go on to achieve. Dr. Tobin enjoys helping new and pre-service teachers recognize and understand their tremendous responsibilities and capabilities in the classroom. Dr. Tobin started her teaching career in the lowest income congressional district in the United States and spent a decade mentoring new teachers in high poverty schools in New York City, Philadelphia, and Nashville before pursuing her PhD. She uses the foundational social work values and ideas she learned in her MSW program to guide students in developing empowering student-centered classroom practices. While studying with Dr. Joseph Murray at Vanderbilt University, Dr. Tobin developed her specific focus on children experience homelessness. They co-authored the book Homelessness Comes to School, Cohen Press 2011. Dr. Tobin has since written, published, taught, and delivered professional development for teachers on the needs and experiences of this vulnerable population, both at home and abroad. Her most recent book, Homelessness in the Classroom, offers teachers and other school personnel practical approaches for serving undomiciled students. Dr. Tobin, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Let me go ahead and share my presentation. I am very happy to be here, and I appreciate that everyone is braving the scary weather to be out of your safe spot with your computer at this moment. Okay. So thank you also very much to Ms. Nicholson, because that was an excellent overview of everything we could kind of possibly want to know about what homelessness looks like when it comes to school and how we should be thinking about it. So my presentation today is going to focus on school leaders, and then also what school leaders can be thinking about in terms of what their teachers might need. And then I'll kind of wrap up with how I think, help with that moving forward. So homelessness at school. First, let me tell you a little bit about my journey, and then I promise there's a reason. It's not just that I like to talk about myself. So I'm an associate professor of education here at LSU. This is my 9th year here. Before here, I was at a tiny Catholic university in Scranton, Pennsylvania called Marywood University for 5 years. But when I started my teaching career, as Ms. Stuckey mentioned in my intro, I was here on the left at PS 25 in the South Bronx in New York City. I taught 2nd and 4th grades there. And then I moved to Philadelphia and I taught at Independence Charter School. I was a 7th grade ELA and social studies teacher there. Fun fact about Independence Charter School, it's not connected to any other charter organization or management network, anything like that, just an independent charter school, and it's about to celebrate its 25th anniversary. But I tell you all of this because in none of my teaching experiences and then the mentoring that I did of other teachers in other schools, my husband is a teacher, my friends are teachers, my mom's a teacher, no one had ever talked to me about students experiencing homelessness. I knew I had students who lived at the shelter, but I didn't know that I had any imperative to meet their needs in any different way than I met anyone else's needs, or that there was federal law that had been in place since the 1980s. And so I was really surprised. So I started doing some research here at LSU. And this is one of the quotes from a teacher that I talked to in my research. And she said, Stephanie is a pseudonym, she said, it wasn't talked about at all at school, not during team meetings, which were mandatory. We didn't have any resources mentioning it in professional development meetings, just nothing. And then she said, I've actually been homeless myself when I was younger. That's pretty much the only training that I have. There should be at least a once in a year seminar. And so she had worked at 3 schools in 2 districts and never had any professional development about teaching this population. And that mirrored my own experience and the experience of everyone I know. So I have set out to try to bridge that gap between what I know as a researcher and what teachers need in the classroom. So Brandy Grow, who you'll hear from in a few minutes, and I recently published a book, the only one that exists right now, specifically for teachers, called Homelessness in the Classroom, that aims to collect what we know from research. And some of it has to be extrapolated because we don't have a bunch of randomly controlled trials of the best way to teach students experiencing homelessness. Some of it we have single case studies. We have to kind of borrow from other research to know what is likely to work best. But this is really, it's a small book, it's a handbook with practical strategies, because whenever I am talking to teachers or preparing teachers, I always have a mind to, when I started teaching, I had nothing. I had no materials. I had no resources. It was pre-internet. I didn't have a computer. So when I'm asking teachers to do things or suggesting that they do things differently, I try to be very mindful of the fact that they are overworked, underappreciated, and that they may not have a lot of resources available to them. So with all that in mind, Brandy and I wrote this book trying to give teachers some practical advice. So trends and issues, I'll go quickly over this because Ms. Nicholson already touched on a lot of this. 1.4 million children identified in school as experiencing homelessness, but as you heard, the number is probably much larger. It's that it's a hidden problem. Several thousand in Louisiana that we know about. These students tend to be concentrated in urban or rural areas. It's often seen as an urban problem, but it's actually an urban and rural problem. We don't see it as much in the suburbs. And students experiencing homelessness are protected by the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act of 1987. So things to know from the research. So we've only had family homelessness in the United States post-depression since the 1980s. And since the 1980s, a core group of researchers has really tried to figure out what is the experience like, what are the outcomes like for students who have this particular set of challenges. And we have found over the years, students who experience homelessness have lower GPAs, higher rates of dropout, they have greater mental health challenges, more physical health issues, they have more learning challenges than their housed peers. There are several studies that found that students experiencing homelessness are more likely than their housed peers to qualify for special ed services, but simultaneously less likely to be receiving them. And part of that has to do with school mobility. So before I started researching homelessness, it really seemed like a static condition in my mind. And it turns out that homelessness is often characterized by chaos. There's a lot of moving around. We were in an apartment and we got evicted, and now we're sleeping on grandma's couch, but now mom's boyfriend and grandma don't get along, so now we're going to go live in our car for a while. So there's a lot of change, a lot of movement, and oftentimes that's what gets in the way of a learning disability being diagnosed and then an IEP being put together and implemented, because if there are school changes in between, that information gets lost. They're also more likely to be suspended from school, unfortunately, possibly related to the way Ms. Nicholson talked about our punitive approach to absences. So almost all of the research finds that homeless student achievement is mediated by attendance, meaning that the factor that we can figure out that causes all these other things is that they simply don't get to come to school as often. And I highlighted it in red because it is kind of a national challenge actually facing all students right now. Post-COVID, students are not coming to school. And so this field actually has some strategies to bring to bear here because that has been the primary challenge of students experiencing homelessness as long as we've been researching them. To give you a picture of Louisiana specifically, we have about 2.5% of our population here, our student population, identified as experiencing homelessness. That puts us in the second to top category. So I guess, yay, we're not the worst, but also we're certainly not the best. That's a pretty high rate and something that we need to keep track of. You heard about kind of the legal requirements of the law. So the law, as it was originally written, tried to guarantee both access for students experiencing homelessness to school and also success at school. So under access, every district is required to have a McKinney-Vento liaison. Whether the district receives McKinney-Vento funding or not, everyone is supposed to have a person whose job it is to liaise with students and families experiencing homelessness. In a district like Baton Rouge, where we have enough students and a high enough poverty rate, it's one person whose full-time job is McKinney-Vento liaison. In a lot of other districts or parishes, particularly wealthier ones, where they might not have as many students experiencing homelessness, it's often a title that's added to one or two other jobs that somebody has. So the Title I coordinator is often also the McKinney-Vento liaison, but there has to be one for every district. As you heard, the legal definition of who experiences homelessness at school is different from what HUD uses, which can confuse parents because if HUD has told them you don't qualify for a voucher because you're doubled up with another family, you're not homeless, then why would they come to school and identify themselves as homeless and get services? So the law also requires schools to make good faith efforts to identify students experiencing homelessness. And one of the best ways to do that is to create pathways for parents and students to disclose their status that reduce the shame and the stigma associated with that information. I always tell my teacher candidates, like, students and parents are not going to come to school and say, we are homeless, because that doesn't make them feel good. It doesn't make them feel like you're going to respect them as a teacher. The kids worry about being teased or bullied. So trying to find ways where parents can communicate that information or students can communicate it without having to worry that it's going to be used against them. The law also requires that students identified as homelessness be allowed to enroll immediately, even without any paperwork. So no immunization records, no proof of residency, no utility bill to prove your residency. If a family presents and says they're experiencing homelessness, the school is supposed to make every effort to enroll them that same day, if possible, or the next day. And then the school is supposed to work together with parents or unaccompanied youth themselves to recover the documentation that they would otherwise have presented the day they got there. They're also supposed to be automatically enrolled in the free and reduced lunch program. That doesn't make a difference in a district like Baton Rouge where all students get free and reduced lunch, but in other districts it does make a difference. They're supposed to be provided transportation. They're also supposed to be given school choice. So within a district, certainly, but even inter-district, if you are living in East Baton Rouge Parish and your kids go to Highland Elementary and you get evicted and you have to go stay with your brother-in-law in Denham Springs, as a parent, you are supposed to be able to choose whether you want to keep your kids enrolled at Highland Elementary in EBR or whether you want to transfer them formally to a school in Denham Springs. If the school disagrees or the districts disagree, there's also supposed to be a dispute resolution procedure to make sure that the best interests of the child are being fit there. And the districts are supposed to work together to provide transportation even across district lines. So I know all of that costs money, unfortunately. So a lot of times it's not in schools' best financial interest to identify students or try to meet their needs, but the federal law does require it. And then there's this sort of squishier issue of success. So we're supposed to be promoting homeless student success at school. What does success look like? How do we do that? The law is less specific. However, when it was reauthorized in 2015 under Every Student Succeeds Act, there was a little bit more flexibility given to funding for things like school supplies, tutoring, extracurricular activities. So if a student needs an instrument to be in the band or needs a uniform to play on a team, there is actually funding allowed to be used for that in the law since 2015. And there's a little bit more focus, as Dr. Groh will talk about on the transition between high school and college or the work world. Okay, so research shows us actually that school is very important for this population, even more so than their housed peers. So since 1988, researchers have found that SEH is students experiencing homelessness. So students experiencing homelessness hold more positive views of school than their housed peers. Even if, you know, all kids like to complain about school, school is consistent. It's always open. There's food there. The people there are predictable. It's one thing that is a still point in a turning world. In 1991, Rescorla and her team recommended schools make sure that they are safe and secure havens for students experiencing homelessness. In 1994, researchers found that students experiencing homelessness have a strong belief in the value of academics and good behavior. And then in 2017, a group of social work faculty actually interviewed fifth graders experiencing homelessness and compared their responses to housed fifth graders and found that the students experiencing homelessness were more likely to talk about how they needed to get good grades in order to have a chance at adult stability. So even by fifth grade, students experiencing homelessness place more value on doing well at school than their housed peers. We don't always see that in the way we understand their behavior. We wouldn't always assume that, but that is actually true. All right, so school level best practices. What can administrators do? First, learn what homelessness is like, and then sensitize all staff. So not just teachers, guidance counselors, school social workers, the cafeteria staff, bus drivers, the custodial staff. Everyone needs to know that this exists in our community, what it's like, and then how we speak to students and families who we think might be struggling with housing instability. Some ways to do this that have been shared with me by district leaders over the years, visiting shelters. I met a principal in Pennsylvania once who told me that at the beginning of the school year, he takes all of his new teachers to their local homeless shelter at 6 o'clock in the morning so they can see what their students have been through before they get to school. Obviously, if teachers have free time, which they often do not, you can volunteer, shelters and soup kitchens, but then there are also plenty of kind of pop culture ways to learn more about this experience that are less work intensive or time intensive than going to a shelter. There are documentaries, there are books. I have several to recommend. Poor Kids and Homeless, the Motel Kids of Orange County are both documentaries. Florida Project is fictional, but it is so close to the Motel Kids of Orange County that it almost counts as a documentary. That's a population of kids we often don't think about, but as of right now, students residing in motels are considered homeless at school. Again, not by HUD, but they are considered homeless at school. So all of these kind of help practitioners, teachers, whoever is going to be interfacing with these students understand a little bit about what the experience is like. Other books that really bring a lot to bear on this topic are Evicted by Matthew Desmond. Rachel and Her Children is a book actually from the 1980s about families living in what was called a welfare hotel back in those days in New York City. And interestingly enough, Invisible Child is also about a family in a homeless shelter in New York City. It was published 2 years ago and won a Pulitzer Prize. And some of the descriptions of the living conditions are identical, which is overwhelming, but also extremely elucidating. So Invisible Child was a 5-article series in the New York Times. And then the reporter actually followed the family for an entire decade and wrote a book about it. It's extremely, extremely well-researched and really readable. So I highly recommend that one. And then for people who prefer something a little quicker, there are a bunch of podcast episodes. The Promise is about Nashville public housing, but it also kind of helps you understand sort of the cyclical nature for some families of housing and homelessness and housing and homelessness. And then this New York Times, The Two Students Let Us Into Their Lives is like a photo essay where you can really see pictures of what the students are doing at 6 o'clock in the morning, what they're doing after school, how much time they're spending, you know, traveling between places. That one is also really eye-opening. And then I particularly like this NPR podcast because I was interviewed, but that was about how COVID was specifically problematic for students experiencing homelessness. And then most recently, excuse me, a researcher from Germany and I published an article in the Kaplan magazine about what Germany does for high school students who experience homelessness and have left high school but want to come back and complete a degree. So we have a lot to learn from other countries as well. NACCE, obviously, you just heard from their director, has a bunch of webinars. The National Center for Homeless Education also has unending webinars. There are always opportunities for educators to learn more about this population and about sort of specific issues within it. Classroom level best practices. So teachers need to know to prioritize social connections. A lot of times because of that chaos and that moving around, students experiencing homelessness withdraw, or they sort of want to stop bothering to make new friends because they feel like they're just going to have to leave them again. So structured opportunities to bond with peers lead to classroom success. And then attending to students' emotional needs, recognizing that hopefully they have school counselors and social workers to reach out to, but if teachers don't, then they may need to brush up on what they know about trauma and the trauma of homelessness, but also a lot of times there's a precipitating event like a weather disaster or domestic violence, which is a trauma in itself that then leads to the trauma of homelessness. And I put material selection because a lot of times teachers and teacher candidates are confused about whether it's okay to talk about homelessness if you know that some of your students might be experiencing it. And I will say an absolute and resounding yes. Certainly, your teachers aren't going to call out a student that they know is experiencing homelessness, but they're also not going to trigger a student by talking about it in school. I get that concern a lot. Well, I don't want them to be triggered. They're not going to be triggered. They're not going to forget they're homeless and then remember because you read a book in class. So I highly recommend incorporating material that validates the experience, that helps students understand each other and helps students feel seen. So interestingly enough, in the 1990s, Reading Rainbow had an episode about a little boy and his dad who live in the airport, is what this book is about. This Eve Bunting book, Fly Away Home. And then they, as Reading Rainbow did, they follow a real life family that's in a shelter and then they get housing. So that's a fascinating elementary material selection. When I work with teachers, I talk more about books like A Shelter in Our Car, Still a Family, which is about a family that has to break up because mom and dad can't be in the same shelter together. And then there are, these first two are middle grades novels, and then the second two are young adult novels, but there are lots of novels that are appropriate for classroom use that incorporate some experiences of homelessness that I highly recommend to teachers as well. There are specific academic considerations. Like I said, when I'm working with teachers, we talk about expecting that students will have gaps in their knowledge because they've moved around so much. So trying to pre-test and assess as much as possible. I'm really big on making sure students have all the supplies they need, including to do their homework. So, you know, not every kid has access to a trifold poster board, and not every kid has access to a printer or even Wi-Fi at home. And a lot of times kids and families are not going to tell the teacher that. They're just going to not do their homework and take a 0 rather than admit that they didn't have the supplies to do an assignment. So trying to make sure that those things are available to all students. Flexibility with absences. So like Ms. Nicholson was saying, what is school like when kids come back after an absence? Do we punish them? Because that makes them less likely to want to come back again. Do we welcome them? Do we make sure that they know that we're happy that they're there? Do we give them flexibility with makeup work? It can be difficult for teachers because they're held to a lot of assessment requirements, but it's really important for us to make sure that students feel safe and accepted. Otherwise, there's not going to be an imperative for them to come. Prioritizing belonging and safety, trying to conclude learning either in a day or a week, and if possible, my daughter had a first grade teacher who did this, sending a weekly progress report home, kind of with the anticipation that students may have to move to another school over the weekend or next week. And that way, at least parents could take that information to a new teacher and say, well, this is what my kid was doing last time she was in school. Other academic considerations are that partner work. Teachers need to be sensitized to look for the signs that a student might be experiencing homelessness: dirty clothes, food hoarding, not wanting to go home, lack of response from parents. This is a big one. We all need to work on giving parents some grace, giving them the benefit of the doubt, even when they don't appear to be making decisions that we think are in their kids' best interest. We need to give them the benefit of the doubt that they are doing that. This population really likes to have schoolwork connected to real life experiences and needs. So low income and housing unstable youth are more interested than their middle class and stably housed peers in having their schoolwork connect to what is really important to them. Like I said, choosing relevant materials, not shying away from homelessness, and then planning from a strengths perspective. So I do come from a little bit of a social work background, and that really helped me as a teacher, planning from a strengths perspective, trying to figure out what my students could do and what they were good at, really helped me be a more effective teacher. So when I work with teachers, those are some of the things we focus on. I also focus on trauma and compassion fatigue because these are very real concerns for teachers. So helping them differentiate between different types of stress and trauma, helping them learn appropriate de-escalation strategies. So when a student is responding from a place of trauma, that's different than a student is just feeling ornery today and wants to kind of test boundaries and so needs a different response. This is a big one, recognizing compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma in ourselves. So I'm seeing, unfortunately, a lot of evidence of dysregulated teachers in the classroom. So teachers whose own emotions are not arranged the way they should be, maybe because of their own trauma from childhood, earlier life, weather-related disasters, displacement, stuff like that. But teachers, unfortunately, need to make sure that they are emotionally regulated so that they can keep the classroom emotionally regulated as well. Other things educators can do: support parents, learn the resources available in their community, provide enrichment. So after school programs are really highly impactful for this population. Push back against dehumanization. So dehumanizing policies like ones that would require you to take away a kid's warm sweatshirt because it's the wrong color. If that's a family that really can't afford a sweatshirt in the right color, why are we doing that? And teachers need to be advocates for their students in ways like that, against policies that kind of dehumanize our students. And then pursue professional development. And to that end, that is a QR code to my website, or I hope you will reach out to me at ktobin@lsu.edu, because I do offer professional development workshops for teachers and would be happy to bring one to your school or your district. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. This has been so informative and learning so much. So now we're on to Keisha Smith. And Keisha is a third-year doctoral student at Louisiana State University. She earned a Bachelor's of Art in both psychology and sociology, in addition to a Master's of Social Work from Georgia State University. Kanisha served as a social work practitioner for almost a decade prior to pursuing a doctoral degree, and while she has supported different populations in a variety of roles, her passion resounds with a school social work practice. As a school social worker, Kanisha developed a strong interest in the McKinley-Vito Homeless Assistance Act and supporting families experience homelessness through advocacy and resource procurement. Her strong interest in McKinley-Vento led her to pursue a PhD in social work with hopes of exploring the policy's implementation, nationwide. Her additional research interests include housing insecurity within post-secondary institutions, policies that impact unhoused populations, school social work practice, child welfare, and community. Thank you, Kanisha.
Thank you so much. My name is Kanisha Smith. K is just easier to remember for reference point. So today I will be talking about the intersection of social work and education, and how, as social workers, or school social workers rather, we can build bridges to support children and youth that are experiencing homelessness. And some of the information that I have within my presentation has been mentioned, so I'll just tap on it briefly and then we will proceed. So first, I'd like to start off with just a little bit more of who I am and what led me to this work. So of course, Lois mentioned that I am a doctoral student in the School of Social Work, and my research interests surround pretty much policies that impact unhoused populations. So that could be children and youth in the early childhood setting, K through 12, post-secondary, and also unsheltered populations. And my work is grounded in Metro Atlanta And oddly enough, I was a school social worker in a suburban district, and that piqued my interest in students experiencing homelessness. Just basically the fact that my district had a whole department dedicated to homelessness. It was literally called the Homeless Education Department. And this was essentially considered to be a suburban school district. So with that, most of my practice has been within school social work practice. And what I love about school social work practice is that it is autonomous. And how I practice school social work may be different from how individuals practice in the state of Louisiana or Kentucky or Wisconsin, but I can appreciate the autonomy that our profession yields. So by all means, just know that my presentation is not inclusive of what all social workers can do because it does vary city, parish, state, and the like. So first, I'd like to start off by identifying what school social work practice is. So according to the National Association of Social Workers, which is essentially the largest professional organization for social workers that houses our specialty practices, school social workers serve as the integral link between home, school, and community, essentially seeking to help students achieve academic success. So my layman's term of that is essentially we seek to eliminate any and all barriers to academic success, whether it be in the home setting, the school setting, or the community setting, with special emphasis on mental health intervention, crisis management, and advocacy. So first, starting in the home. First, students, since this is a presentation surrounding students experiencing homelessness, students that necessarily are without homes, whether they're residing in hotels or motels, whether they're residing in shelters, they're doubled up, or youth that may be couch surfing. As a school social worker or as school social workers, we look at what are the barriers that prevent you from, and pardon the rain in the background, as mentioned, we are under severe weather today. But as school social workers, we seek to identify barriers to students coming to school. So whether that be transportation, is this a referral that I can put in, or will I need to collaborate with a homeless liaison? Or, hey, sometimes we have students that are unsheltered. Do you need help locating a shelter or other resources that may be helpful? As a school social worker, I had a lot of families that experienced fires, and they were instantly unhoused as a result of those conditions that they weren't able to help. So of course there were families that experienced evictions or other types of situations that yielded homelessness, but the primary one for me was evictions and fires. And for me as a school social worker, the crisis intervention was to find shelter. Sometimes I had families of 10, which is, it's hard to place a family of 10 in a shelter. Sometimes I had families of 3. And looking at the structure of families, you have, stipulations in relation to youth, male students, female students, mothers, fathers, and that also required separation. So as a school social worker, we are that connector, that liaison that says, hey, if this is a barrier, how can I help eliminate the barrier, or how can I help mediate the barrier? And also home visits are a part of that. So as it relates to school, we provide a level of support that connects us in collaboration with all school staff. So that could be school counselors, that could be teachers, administrators, bus drivers, school lunch staff, secretaries. Literally, we are the liaison for everyone. So I've worked with, as a school social worker, all populations, everyone in the school. And with that comes a level of advocacy and learning and acknowledging the different situations that students are facing and how that can impact their ability to show up in school each day. And of course, attendance, as discussed already within our presentation, is a big factor, as well as sitting on teams that have positive behavior interventions and supports in schools, response to intervention, and of course, multi-tiered levels of support. And with this, as a school social worker, we can sit on these panels or contribute in ways that help students serve as a voice of advocacy for students. Hey, we have students that may not be able to stay after school for different activities. How can we supplement their inability to receive additional opportunities, or hey, I've asked teachers if they could come a little earlier. And it's at will, they could of course say no. Hey, I have a student who's not able to stay after school. Would you mind, yielding 10 minutes within your lunch break to help the student? Or would you mind coming to school a little bit earlier? Within our school district, we had a flag that let school staff, teachers, school social workers know that, hey, this student may be experiencing some housing insecurity. And that helps us also interact with students differently to promote educational equity. And of course, mental health intervention, which looks different for different school social workers. And lastly, the third part to the homeschool and community connection is, in addition to looking at barriers to academics within the home, within the school, that could be, lack of food or engagement or connection to teachers. We also work within the community. That's establishing community partnerships, maybe increasing awareness of what housing insecurity is in different school districts. So if you don't have a shelter in your district, what would housing insecurity look like? Or if you have families that maybe frequent libraries, I've had that, or laundromat areas, it's essentially thinking of ways to assess the needs of our families and meet them where they are, which is essentially what school social workers do, and provide resources, which could be different things. So I know that funding is adjusting with under our current leadership, and food pantries may not be as readily available, but there are always ways to find resources for students. I've literally, as an example, I did a clothing drive within one of our schools. It just an idea that just came to me one day. Hey, instead of donating your clothes to the Goodwill or the local thrift store, would you all mind coming to my office with bins, containers, bags of clothes that we could utilize to service our community? And I appreciated my administrative leadership, the assistant principal and the principal and the school counselor, for their support. First of all, giving me the green light to do this initiative, but also the support that allowed me to support our families, because let's just say we had 25 teachers within that specific elementary school. They got with their friends and their families, and I had way more clothing than I could account for, in addition to donations of toiletries. And we literally did a fall school drive, which was literally allowing parents, the entire school, because we don't target or stigmatize families that are experiencing homelessness. We provided them the opportunity to come to the school and pick out clothes, essentially as if you were to go to a Goodwill or another thrift store, for free. And I was able to collaborate with our community partners to receive little thank you bags that said, hey, you're able to put the clothes here. And that was free. Literally all the school staff had to do was go through their closets. I went through my closet. I got with my family, my friends, and we all just donated. And that was just a free way of being able to help our families. But it also required a certain level of community intervention. Next, I'll talk about how school social workers can build bridges to support children and youth experiencing homelessness. Just tapping on a few things. I know it was mentioned, pretty much the numbers. So during the 2020-2021 school year, over 17,000, just to put a number. I know Dr. Tobin mentioned a little over 2% of our students within the state of Louisiana were experiencing homelessness. So to put a number with that, and this was a couple of school years ago, so of course this number could have been adjusted since then, but 17,000 across the entire state were students that were enrolled, either experiencing doubled up conditions, residing with family and friends due to economic hardship, hotels or motels, unsheltered, and also residing in shelters as well. And of course, unaccompanied youth and migratory students as well. So as a school social worker, I look more on the emotional side of things. So also as a researcher, I look at what research says, which helped me compose my presentation today. So students experiencing homelessness, if we can put ourselves in their shoes, experience, of course, a loss of personal space, but a loss of possessions. When you're moving from place to place, space to space, there are things that can get lost in that process, in addition to important documents for school and enrollment, but other items that students find helpful or comforting can be lost as a result of their transition. So how I think about this is I think about the things that are a part of my daily routine, whether that be a cup of tea in the morning or music. Music is an essential for my everyday reality. I don't know what life would be like for me if I didn't have a cup of tea in the morning, or I wasn't able to listen to 2 or 3 songs before I start my day. So students that are in transition may not have these possessions or the routines that they are used to, which could cause changes in relationships and, of course, changes in their development. So in looking at just social emotional functioning as a result of transition, we look at emotional regulation, which is the ability to evaluate and monitor how you respond to different situations. We look at the physiological stress response, which pretty much indicates that students that have received high levels of stress at an early age, that can impact, of course, their ability to respond to stress later, but also can have a negative impact on a myriad of health concerns down the line, which could also lead to withdrawal and isolation, increased levels of anxiety, and specifically within girls, in comparison to males, experience higher levels of depression and PTSD, which can also impact their ability to formulate positive relationships with peers and their teachers within school settings. So I try to make it as easy and as simple as possible. Social support, resilience, and trauma-based practices have been a theme within our presentation today. So in order for me to, I'm just going to expound on what that could look like and how that could be something that's tangible that could be literally applied immediately, would be establishing supportive relationships within schools. And that could literally be peer-to-peer. So, hey, I'm going to connect students with a peer within their class or outside of their class that promotes a level of expectation and engagement. I know someone is looking forward to seeing me every day. I know someone at school is looking forward to engaging with me. There's an expectation and an excitement that comes with that. But also looking at the composition of students' social networks. Research indicates that if we look at the diversity of the students' network, we can help them build more supportive networks. So the composition could be, for me, when I ask students, outside of the school, who do you have? When school closes during the weekends, who are you able to talk to? Is it a friend in your community? Is it a parent? Is it a godparent? Is it someone within a religious institution? Is it a neighbor? So I always look at who within the school setting students feel comfortable talking to. Do you have an identified teacher, an identified support personnel, but also who outside of the school, in addition to your peers, adult-wise, what is the composition of your social network? And then we look at the function. So, hey, if you're happy or if you need some additional motivation, who can you go to? If you're sad and you need someone to talk to, who can you go to? Who in the world do you feel like is comforting to you when no one else is? So those are just different ways that we can look at the composition and the function of social networks. And then lastly, structure. What different levels of support are we providing for students? Do you have someone that provides you with a level of mentorship? Of course, you have like a school counselor that provides you with general guidance and support and advisement and preparation for post-secondary education. What about outside of the school setting? Do you have anyone that mentors you just personally? So we have academic mentorship. Do you have personal mentorship? Do you have individuals that you can go to for different reasons? And that helps us look at the structure of our relationships as well. As mentioned, of course, throughout our presentation, we know that trauma-informed approaches allow us to understand the impact of trauma on our students, specifically those that are experiencing homelessness. And in understanding that impact, of course, through professional development and just interacting with students, we want to make sure that we're resisting opportunities that re-traumatize students. And that could look different for different students, which is why we have to learn more about the needs of our students within our schools. That could be asking specific questions. That could be, hey, instead of sending you to a certain side of the room, we're going to allow you to have your time here. Basically, individualized supports to accommodate the needs of our students also align with trauma-informed approaches. And lastly, building trust within supportive communities. And again, this looks different for different students. I've interacted with many students that are experiencing homelessness, and the students in high school are always the hardest ones to, well, that were always the most challenging ones for me to build trust with and engage with, whether it be unaccompanied youth or those that are couch surfing or those that are residing in hotels or motels, just because a general lack of trust based on their experiences. So with that, of course, a lot of my interaction with them were based on, hey, I got a social work referral for a student that, is constantly tardy or is leaving school early or exhibits, different signs that may, pique a teacher's interest or an administrator's interest in their housing status. So, I'm not able to go to a student and say, hey, your teacher informed me that you're asking for additional food. Or, hey, I noticed that you're leaving school early every day, or you have noted that you don't live in the district anymore, or different things, or even in elementary school, hey, I've had bus drivers inform me that students aren't being picked up by their parents, or they're not necessarily getting off at those stops anymore. So, hey, I can't go to a student and say, hey, I noticed that your mom's at the bus stop, but you're not going into the house that you were in before. It's generally building a rapport and helping students learn who you are and how you're here to help prior to asking and assessing for their needs. And next, we have the resilience framework, which essentially indicates that students will face adversity. And the ability to build resilience is a process that comes from the availability of resources and different individuals within your space that help promote positive interactions. That goes with strength-based approaches, that goes with social support and connection, peer networks, teacher-student interactions and support. How can we help students maintain positive relationships through resilience, but also acknowledging that they face a high level of adversity, and this is a process. So this is not something that students are going to acquire. Resilience, for some students, comes intuitively, but for other students, it may require a process based on the availability of positive resources that can help them sustain positive relationships. And this is pretty much just to sum up everything. So school social workers and essentially everyone can support students experiencing homelessness by trauma-informed approaches, as we've reiterated throughout our presentation, resilience framework that focuses on strengths-based perspective, but also allows for a buffer to acknowledge that building resilience can be a process for some students, but it requires a reiteration of positive interactions and support. Individual counseling, school social workers can provide that for students based on their individual needs. Case management, which was my favorite part of school social work practice because it allows me the opportunity to engage with several students throughout the course of a day or week. And it's just literally a check-in, like, hey, I want to check in with you. I want to see how you're doing. We can talk about whatever you like to talk about. It's not necessarily a counseling session. It's just a check-in. Because students, they get a little weary when the counseling, there's nothing wrong with me. I don't need it. My parents are weary of it. So, hey, I'm just checking in with you. I'm looking forward to seeing you. I'm someone that will interact with you on a regular basis. And I let students know so they can expect it. And I hold my word. Hey, I'm going to meet with you every Monday at 2 p.m. I'm gonna call you, this is a period that's agreed upon by your administration, and they look forward to that. Even if we're just sitting in there and you telling me what you're gonna do for the weekend, it's literally someone that cares. And lastly, attendance. School social workers are charged with identifying students that are at risk, and attendance is one of the first indicators that as school social workers, we know that students are at risk based on the amount of days that you miss and tardies. So of course, tardies indicate that, hey, you may not live in the district anymore, but also could indicate that, you just lax coming to school. But hey, that's the first indicator. Are you tardy? Are you leaving early? 90% of my referrals started, well, maybe 80% of my referrals started with attendance. Hey, I have the student leaving early, or they're coming late, or, they're not engaged when they're here, or they're here and they're not coming to my class. So that is pretty much a summary. These are my references. And I believe my last one has my contact information if I can support you and your teams throughout the districts. Thank you.
Great job. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Brandy? There she is. So Dr. Brandy Ross is an accomplished academic and leader, earning her PhD in educational leadership and research from Louisiana State University in 2023. She also holds a Bachelor's of Art in Social Work from Buffalo State College, where she developed a foundational understanding of social justice and community needs, and a Master of Arts in Post-Secondary Educational Leadership and Student Affairs from San Diego State University, equipping her with essential skills in fostering student success. With 15 years of extensive experience in higher education, Brandy has worked in diverse educational environments, including community college that serve a broad range of students, the state flagship university, which sets the standard for academic excellence, and the Louisiana State Department of Education, where she focused on data and statewide educational initiatives. Most recently, her role at the University of Louisiana System Office allowed her to influence higher education across multiple institutions, shaping policies that promote student access and equity. Brandy is deeply committed to advocating for college access and success among disadvantaged populations, particularly first-generation college students and homeless people. Her dedication is reflected in her co-authored book, Homelessness in the Classroom, which explores the challenges and solutions surrounding educational attainment for students experiencing homelessness, alongside her esteemed colleague, Dr. Tobin. Thank you, Brandy.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending our webinar. I will be closing us out. I guess I'm the anchor for today's webinars. A lot of great information, and I will be coming from a slightly different lens, looking at it from the higher education perspective, and as we transition our students from high school to college and some of the challenges we face in higher education. So I will jump right in. So as we know, higher education, going to college is a process for anyone, and homelessness does not take away the struggle and challenges that anyone face. But there are additional challenges that homeless students can face when trying to get into college and stay into college. And some of those challenges are the application itself, the testing for admission, the free application for student aid, which is the FAFSA, and I'll go into those two things in detail a little later on. Housing, whatever that may be, if it's on campus, on or off campus, the actual application, the deposits, all of those things are challenges for students who experience homelessness, and ultimately their safety. If they're sleeping in their car, how they're going to be safe. If they're on campus, how are they going to protect their belongings and things. So all of these are some of the challenges that they face, but there are many, many, many more. So we'll go into a little bit of just the education and homelessness and how it relates. It is a bidirectional relationship. They do affect each other. So low educational attainment is a risk factor for homelessness, and homelessness is a risk factor for low educational attainment. So this is why we discuss this in this format and why we have this webinar, because they are related, and more specifically for our young adults with less than a high school diploma or GED, they're 4.5 times more likely to repeat that experience of homelessness than their peers that completed high school. And then for young adults who experience homelessness, we're less than 1/3 as likely to enroll in a 4-year college. So these numbers and data kind of shows that relation and how we have to look at both of these topics together. So there are many, many myths about homelessness in college. The very first one is that it doesn't exist. Homeless students are not homeless once they're in college because they have campus housing. That's incorrect. Some of the housing is expensive. They may not be able to afford it, or because of enrollment booms in the housing rules, there may not be enough housing even available for all the students that want to enroll. So that is a myth that I like to just say out front, that homelessness does exist in higher education. I've worked with it my whole career, and majority of what we see is the transitional homelessness. And that's when an individual had a life experience, lost a job, financial issues, and they became homeless due to that experience or situation that was isolated. And then we also have the hidden homelessness, which we have discussed, and that's the doubling up. That's the couch surfing. That's where students often sleep in the library because it's open the latest, and then take showers at gyms. And we don't know, because we don't go home with them, where they're actually going. So they tend to be hidden right in plain sight. So that is the type of homelessness that we see, because it's very hidden and not disguised as we typically see homelessness on a college campus. And then the other myth is that students have family support and they can just simply call their parents and go home for breaks. That's not the makeup of all of the families. That's not realistic, in that they can just go home on breaks because they don't have a place to go. So for some of the facts about homelessness in college, the Hope Center just produced this new study last month that went over a lot of great information that really puts it into perspective of what we see now. And the Hope Center found that 59% of students experience at least one form of basic needs that included either food, housing, food or housing, and it included 41% experiencing food insecurities, 48% of students experience housing insecurities, and 14% experience actual homelessness. So these are the actual numbers that we see now across many campuses in the United States. And just to further look into that, that's 3 in 5 students experience basic needs insecurities related to food or housing. 67% of our parenting students experience housing insecurities. And that's particularly interesting because the average age of our students is 25. So when we're looking at college students, even though we have the traditional 18s freshly coming out of high school, we also have a lot of older students who are averaging 25 and may also be parenting and may also be working. So there's a lot of other factors that are into this 67% of being parenting students experiencing homelessness. And the one that I found the most particularly interesting was the high number, which is 73% experience basic needs insecurities when we factored in other basic needs. So when we look at mental health that we discussed, kind of the trauma based, and just being homeless itself is traumatic. Including that into it, the number goes up. Childcare, which is very expensive, the number goes up. Transportation, and then internet and technology access. We really can't do anything without technology these days. So once we include all of those other basic needs that are becoming basic needs, the number is 73%. And then just looking at the mental health that we have discussed, the trauma, anxiety, depression, it's around 44%. So all of that is kind of debunking the myths that we may have thought about before, but actually putting the number and situations to what we are experiencing in higher education now with homelessness. So as students are transitioning or wanting to go to college, there are a lot of testing that they must do. So this chart just kind of shows the actual fees associated with wanting to simply go to college. So you have to do the AP test, the AC test. Well, AP is not standard. That's if they're taking those courses, but the ACT and SAT are general tests that they will have to take. And if they do any subject-based, that's additional fee. And then the application fee itself. In Louisiana, the average application fee for a college, four-year college, is $50. and that's just one application. So we always encourage students to apply to more than one college. So that's 50 times 3, 50 times 4, or whatever the case may be, how many actual applications they are submitting. The good thing about it is that most of the students do qualify for a fee waiver, and that's when the counselors, social workers, and others that are advocating for these students can direct them in the correct place to get those waivers. So they're not paying out of pocket, and that's not to discourage them from applying. Because if you tell a student it's going to cost you $50 to apply, you have to take the test, and they're thinking about the money and everything it costs, they may just say, oh, I don't want to go to college, or I'm not interested at this time. But in actuality, there are ways that they can still apply for college with the waivers and not have to pay out of pocket. And then there's the FAFSA application. So the FAFSA application is free. It's in the name, so no one should ever have to pay for it, even though I have seen some that do try to charge. So make sure that students are not paying to complete the FAFSA. But there's been a completely redesign of the FAFSA application, and that has caused some kind of pushback in the way that it was implemented. But the original design is to make the application simpler and easier for students to actually apply for the aid that most students are eligible for. So now students must give consent for their tax information before they would have to either submit their tax information or include a retrieval so it can be linked. But now they have to consent to have their tax information sent along with their FAFSA. If they do not give that consent, they cannot complete the FAFSA application. So that's important. Students or parents must sign unless they are independent student. So that is an important process, that trying to get a homeless student that does not have their parents' information, cannot get it, getting them that independent status will help them to at least process the application and not have that hurdle of trying to get something that's impossible, because students have had many issues with trying to complete a FAFSA and it being rejected due to that. Timing of the FAFSA is always important. Verification, it is first come, first serve for some aid, so you want to try to get it in early, and then it has to be done every single year. So the FAFSA Simplification Act allow homeless determination to be carried over to the next year. So that is a recent improvement on that, whereas some students would have their homeless determination and then every year have to try to go back and get it again. And that was becoming problematic in the way that the university, if they transfer, that university would ask for that same documentation again. So now universities, if they transfer, can take that determination from one university and use it from another. So that is helping in that aspect. So for Louisiana, in 2018, we became one of the first states to require the FAFSA application as a graduation requirement. And we received a lot of positive feedback for that. Our FAFSA completion rate rose from being below the national average, which is I think 62% at that time, to almost 80% in 2020. And then we were also ranked #1 in the nation for FAFSA completion. So a lot of times we see Louisiana, we're at the bottom of the list for things. This was actually one area where we were in the top #1 rank. And I saying past tense because that has now changed. But during that time period, we saw an award of FAFSAs being awarded to students. So there was an increase of 6.6% of federal aid or Pell Grant being awarded to students. Now that has stopped, and it is no longer a graduation requirement. And we've also become one of the first states to stop doing that, which is kind of a reversal. But during that time, we did see more students, more minority students, more low-income students, first-generation students, all of those having the opportunity to complete the FAFSA, and more dollars were being awarded to our students, and they were staying in state. So that was a positive thing, and I think we can look at that and continue that, even though it's not a graduation requirement. but we can still advocate and make the FAFSA awareness important to our students that do want to go to college. And then also, when we look at higher education, Louisiana was again one of the first states to pass higher education policy regarding homeless and foster youth. So as we discussed, the definition varies, age range varies, even in some of our federal policies and state policy. There is no federal McKinney veto for higher education. There's no every student succeeds in higher education, so each individual states are doing their own state policy. So in 2016, we have our policy where we define homeless and foster youth with an age restriction, which is under 25. That is one of those things that also vary among federal agencies and states. The age may be 22, the age may be different. So we consider a homeless and foster youth who is under the age of 25. This policy basically made a liaison in the financial aid office to grant the independent status that I spoke about earlier. It gives them the ability to do residency status, priority for on-campus housing if available. So for our community colleges, we do not have on-campus housing, so it's primarily for our four-year universities, and then housing resources during breaks. So with the last 2 points, it doesn't say that they're getting funding for the student. It doesn't say that they're offering them anything other than if we have housing available, we will try to find you a place. And that sometimes is still an issue for students when there's not a lot of housing, or if it's by LSU, it's very expensive. And if it's during the break, that's all they're doing is using all of their funds to provide for their housing. So this is in place. A lot of people do not know about it. So when I'm talking to the financial aid directors, I'm making sure that they're following this guideline to at least provide the student with the independent status. But there are others that once it leaves the financial aid office, or once the financial application is the correct status of independent student, other wraparound services that students need on campus. And that was primarily one of my roles in helping them navigate now higher education, coming from K through 12 setting, or what the expectations are for them academically. What are some of the terminology that they may not have heard before? How to best make them successful in the new environment of higher education. So in closing, just ways that educators can help, because you guys are spending your Saturday with us. You want to know some things that you can do. All educators, counselors, social worker liaisons are all important in advocating for homeless youth. The identification in high school can go a long way when we get them in college. So just simply making them aware or identifying them early on will help us in higher education. Those waivers that I spoke about for the test and application fees are very useful. I don't know the percentage of if they're being used, but if there's one voucher that goes wasted, I think that's one too many. So want to make sure that everyone gets a voucher that's eligible for one for those fees and applications. FAFSA assistance, again, even though it's not being required by the state for high school graduation, I still do FAFSA workshops, still helping students complete the FAFSA the correct way, because if you do it incorrectly, that will delay and could possibly, like I said, delay the timing of awards that could be awarded to students. And then staying connected with the financial aid, student affairs, or single point of contact that is on the campus is important to provide the additional wraparound services, because once they're there, they're going to need additional support in most of our departments, most of the counseling office, all of those will be resources to students. So just making sure that they're aware that those services are available to them once they are on campus or enrolled at a university. And that's my contact information. So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can email me any questions or things that I did not discuss. We can definitely discuss it at a later time or date. I appreciate everyone's time.
Great job. So, do we have any questions in our chat?
I
I do
don't see
not
any.
see any. Nope.
Yeah, I don't see any.
All right. Well, on that
Okay.
note, I guess we can thank everyone for being here and hope you got something out of the many presentations and know how to get in touch with any of us if you need to in the future.
I'd also like to say thank you all very much. These were incredibly useful presentations, inspiring and just enormously informative. Thank you all.